The ledger was found in 1994, shoved behind a false wall in the basement of what used to be the Medical College of Virginia, in Richmond. It wasn't an official university record. It was a private notebook, bound in cracked black leather, smelling of mold and something else, something metallic and old that made the construction workers who found it want to wash their hands immediately. The first page contained a single sentence written in elegant, confident cursive. The physiological immunity of the African subject to thermal extremes, a study in 14 cases. Below that a date, August 12, 1860. What followed were 80 pages of meticulous clinical observations that described one of the most terrifying chapters in the history of American medicine, a chapter that didn't take place in a dungeon or a secret facility, but in a well-lit, respectable medical ward, overseen by a man who was considered a pioneer of his time. This is the story of Dr. Silas Thorne, the 14 men and women he used as human fuel for his ambition, and the silent graveyard that hid his failures for over a century. Before we open the ledger and expose the nightmare detailed inside, make sure you are subscribed to this channel. We dig up the history that others try to bury, and let us know in the comments, do you believe medical ethics are absolute, or do they change with the times? Now, let's go back to Richmond, Virginia, on the eve of the Civil War, where the heat was rising in more ways than one. Richmond in 1860 was a city on the edge. The air was thick with the humidity of the James River and the tension of a country about to tear itself apart. It was a city of industry, of ironworks and flour mills, and of the largest slave market in the Upper South. Human beings were bought, sold, and leased daily in the shadow of the Capitol building. Dr. Silas Thorne arrived in Richmond in January of that year. He was 42 years old, a man of intense, nervous energy with a reputation built in the medical halls of Philadelphia and London. He was obsessed with a specific medical theory that was gaining traction in the scientific racism of the era. The idea that African physiology was fundamentally different from European physiology, specifically regarding heat tolerance and respiratory function. Thorne believed that the African lung and African skin were uniquely designed to withstand extreme temperatures that would kill a white man. He wasn't just interested in this as a biological curiosity. He was interested in it as an economic necessity. If he could scientifically prove that enslaved people were immune to heat stroke and thermal damage, he could justify working them harder, longer, and in more dangerous conditions in the booming iron foundries and steam mills of the industrializing South. It was science in service of profit. But to prove his theory, he needed data, and to get data, he needed subjects. He didn't have to look far. The medical college had an arrangement with local slave owners and the city jail. Enslaved people who were considered low value, too old, too sick, or too rebellious, could be leased to the college for medical research. It was a polite way of saying they were human guinea pigs. Thorne leased 14 people. The ledger lists them only by first name and age. Isaac, 45, Ruth, 22, Big John, 30, Sarah, 19, and 10 others. He didn't bring them to the main lecture hall. He set up a special thermal ward in a brick outbuilding behind the college. He hired a young assistant, a medical student named Elias Vance, to record the data. It is through Vance's shaky, increasingly horrified handwriting in the margins of Thorne's ledger that we know exactly what happened over the next 6 months. The experiment began on a Monday, in March. Thorne's theory was specific. He believed that if he could induce a state of thermal acclimation, the African body would adapt to temperatures upwards of 120 degrees Fahrenheit without losing labor efficiency. He started by constructing what he called the steam box. It was a wooden chamber sealed with pitch connected to a boiler. The subject would sit inside, their head protruding from a hole in the top, while steam was pumped into the box. Isaac was the first. March 14, 1860. Subject: Isaac. Temperature: 110 degrees. Duration: 20 minutes. Observations: profuse sweating, pulse elevated. Subject complains of burning sensation, no blistering observed. Thorne considered this a success. He increased the temperature. March 16, 1860. Subject: Isaac. Temperature: 125 degrees. Duration: 30 minutes. Observations: subject became agitated, attempted to exit chamber, restraints applied, skin hot to touch, pulse rapid. Elias Vance wrote in the margin, "The screaming was difficult to ignore. Dr. Thorne insists it is merely theatrical, that their nerves do not register pain in the same way ours do. I am not convinced." This was the core lie that allowed the horror to continue. The medical consensus of the time that black people felt less pain than white people. It was a convenient lie, a necessary lie for a society built on the whip. Thorne didn't just believe it, he relied on it. By April, the experiments had escalated. Thorne wasn't just testing heat. He was testing remedies for pneumonia and typhoid, operating on the theory that extreme heat could purge the disease from the African lung. He moved from the steam box to the blistering trials. Medical practice of the time often involved counter-irritation, creating a blister on the skin to draw out bad humors from internal organs. Thorne took this to a terrifying extreme. He believed that pouring boiling water directly onto the chest of a pneumonia patient would shock the system into recovery. Ruth, the 22-year-old woman, had developed a cough in the damp holding cells. Thorne saw her not as a patient to be cured, but as an opportunity. April 10, 1860. Subject: Ruth. Condition: bronchial congestion. Treatment: hydrothermal shock application. 2 gallons boiling water applied to thoracic region at 3-minute intervals. Vance's note next to this entry is barely legible, the pen digging deep into the paper. The skin peeled away with the cloth. She went into shock immediately. Dr. Thorne measured her pulse with a stopwatch, looking disappointed that her heart rate dropped so quickly. Ruth died that night. Thorne recorded her death in the ledger as failure of subject constitution, data inconclusive. He didn't stop. He accelerated. He felt he was on the verge of a breakthrough. He told Vance that if they could just find the right temperature, the right duration, they could unlock the secret to creating a super worker, a laborer who could toil in the hellish heat of a blast furnace for 16 hours a day without collapsing. But the subjects were dying. Isaac died in late April from heart failure after a session in the steam box at 140 degrees. Big John, a man described as strong as an ox, died in May. Thorne had wanted to test the limits of physical exertion under heat. He built a treadmill inside the heated room and forced John to run on it while the temperature was raised to 130 degrees. John ran for 4 hours before his heart exploded. Thorne wrote, "Subject lacks stamina. Future subjects must be conditioned more rigorously." By July, 7 of the 14 were dead. The remaining 7 were broken shells of human beings, covered in burns, scars, and the psychological trauma of daily torture disguised as science. Richmond society knew nothing of this. Thorne was a celebrated guest at dinner parties. He lectured at the college about the future of industrial medicine. He was courted by factory owners who wanted to know if his research could help their bottom line. But Elias Vance could no longer sleep. Vance was 23 years old, the son of a poor farmer who had come to Richmond to learn how to heal. Instead, he was learning how to kill efficiently. He began to notice something else, too. The bodies. When a subject died, Thorne didn't send them to the city morgue. He didn't return them to their owners. He listed them as escaped or died of natural causes and paid the insurance fee. Instead, he had them taken to the courtyard well, the East Marshall Street well. It was an old, dry well that the college had supposedly sealed up years ago, but Thorne had reopened it. Under the cover of darkness, he and a hired porter would carry the bodies of the victims, Isaac, Ruth, John, and drop them into the darkness. It was a disposal chute for his failures. On August 12, 1860, the date on the first page of the ledger, the final phase began. Thorne had 7 subjects left. He decided to attempt a mass synchronization experiment. He wanted to see if the thermal immunity could be triggered by simultaneous exposure to extreme heat followed by extreme cold, an early, brutal form of shock therapy. He placed all 7 survivors in the thermal ward. He sealed the windows and doors. He fired up the industrial boilers until the room temperature exceeded 150 degrees. He planned to keep them there for 6 hours, then immediately douse them with ice water. Elias Vance stood outside the door, listening to the sounds from inside. At first there was praying, then screaming, then a low rhythmic moaning, then, after hour 3, silence. Vance couldn't take it. For the first time, he defied Thorne. He grabbed the handle of the heavy iron door. "Open it," Vance demanded. Thorne looked up from his stopwatch, annoyed. "The protocol requires 6 hours, Mr. Vance. We are only at 3. Their silent doctor opened the door. "Silence indicates acclimation," Thorne said. "They are adapting." "They are dying," Vance screamed, and he threw the latch. The heat that rolled out of that room was like a physical blow. It smelled of sweat, fear, and cooked meat. Vance stumbled inside, coughing in the steam. The 7 subjects were on the floor. Most were unconscious, 2 were dead, the others were gasping, their skin angry red and blistered, their chests heaving in the superheated air. Thorne walked in behind him, checking his watch. "Disappointing," he muttered. "They gave up too soon." That was the breaking point. Vance left the college that night. He didn't go to the police. The police in 1860 Richmond were not in the business of arresting white doctors for mistreating slaves. He didn't go to the newspapers. He ran. He took the ledger with him, stealing it from Thorne's desk, perhaps intending to expose him, or perhaps just wanting to take the evidence away from the monster. He hid the ledger in the basement of the building, behind a loose section of brick in the foundation, maybe planning to come back for it when the world was sane again. But the world didn't get sane. 4 months later, South Carolina seceded. 6 months later, the Civil War began. Elias Vance joined the Confederate Army as a field surgeon, perhaps trying to save lives to balance the ones he'd watched end. He died at Antietam in 1862, taking the secret of the ledger to his grave. Dr. Silas Thorne. He flourished during the war. He became a high-ranking medical officer, using his theories on heat and labor to manage the enslaved crews building fortifications around Richmond. He never faced justice. He died in his bed in 1878, a respected member of the Virginia medical establishment. The 14 subjects, Isaac, Ruth, John, Sarah, and the others, vanished from history. Their owners were paid off. Their families in the quarters were told they had been sold or died of fever. They were erased until 1994. When the ledger was found, historians began to dig. They looked at the college records. They found the receipts for the leased slaves. They found the orders for the coal to fire the boilers. And then they looked in the well. During construction at Virginia Commonwealth University, the modern descendant of the medical college, workers uncovered the East Marshall Street well. They expected to find rubble. Instead, they found bones. Coming old, discarded, treated like trash. The remains of at least 50 people were found in that well, including women and children. Forensic analysis showed signs of surgical experimentation, post-mortem dissection, and crucially, signs of thermal damage to bone structures consistent with extreme heat exposure. They found them, the 14, and dozens more. The discovery sent shockwaves through Richmond. It forced a reckoning with the city's past. It wasn't just Thorn. The entire medical institution had been built on the bodies of the enslaved. The very foundation of American gynecology, anesthesiology, and surgery sits on a bedrock of non-consensual experimentation on black bodies. Today, if you visit the campus, there is a memorial. The remains were carefully exhumed and given a proper burial. 150 years late, the Family Representative Council was formed by the descendant community to decide how to honor them. They are no longer specimens. They are ancestors. But the ledger remains. It sits in the archives now, a black book filled with neat handwriting and horrific indifference. It is a testament to the fact that science without ethics is just cruelty with a clipboard. Dr. Silas Thorne proved his theory in a way. He proved that the human body can endure unimaginable suffering, but he also proved something else, that the human soul, when corrupted by power and racism, can justify anything. What do you think? Should the names of doctors like Thorne be erased from medical history? Or should we keep them as a warning? And how many other ledgers are still hidden behind false walls in old buildings across the South? If this story chilled you, hit that like button. It helps us tell the stories that have been silenced for too long. Subscribe for more deep dives into the history they didn't teach you in school. I'll see you in the next video.